Brandon Swanson dialed his parents just after midnight. It was May 14, 2008, a calm spring night in southwestern Minnesota. He was on his way home after celebrating the end of the college semester with friends. Nothing unusual, nothing wild, just a few hours of laughter, a few goodbyes, and then the road. His voice on the phone was calm, even polite. "I drove into a ditch," he said. "I'm fine, but the car's stuck." He told his parents he thought he was near the small town of Lind. He could see lights in the distance. He wasn't panicking. In fact, he sounded focused, a little annoyed, maybe, but not afraid. His dad, Brian, got in the car to pick him up. They agreed to meet by the lights. Brandon said he'd walk toward them. His dad would drive toward him. They stayed on the phone as Brandon moved through the night, describing what he saw: gravel roads, fences, fields. For 47 minutes, the call stayed connected. And then, at exactly 12:57 a.m., Brandon said, "Oh shit." The line went dead. It wasn't a dropped call. It wasn't a goodbye. It was the sound of something happening. And then nothing. No voice. No movement. No signal. Brandon wasn't the kind of guy who vanished. He was 19 years old, a student at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, studying wind turbine technology, a quiet, practical kid with a bright future. He still lived with his parents in Marshall, Minnesota, a small town surrounded by flat farmland and narrow gravel roads. He wasn't a partier. He didn't drink heavily. He had no criminal record. He wasn't depressed or withdrawn. He was just a kid finishing his freshman year of college. That night, May 13th, 2008, was ordinary in every way. He attended a small get-together with classmates in Canby, a nearby town. According to everyone who saw him, Brandon was sober and in good spirits. He left around midnight, intending to drive the 30 minutes back to his home in Marshall. He never made it. People always look for signs after the fact. A hidden note, a strange text, a shift in behavior. But there was none of that. No warning, no reason to be afraid. He was just driving home. When his car got stuck, he didn't panic. He didn't call 911. He called his parents. Calmly, confidently. That detail would come to haunt everyone later. Because if Brandon wasn't scared, who or what made him say, "Oh shit"? And what, in that empty darkness, waited for him at the end of that call? At 11:30 p.m., Brandon said his goodbyes and got into his Chevy Lumina. The road from Canby to Marshall was familiar, mostly empty, a patchwork of gravel and asphalt, winding through the open fields of western Minnesota. The night was clear and cool. There was no rain, no storm, no obvious danger. But at 12:30 a.m., something happened. Brandon's car slid off the narrow gravel road into a ditch. He wasn't injured, and the car wasn't damaged, but it was stuck. He tried to back out. No luck. He tried to drive forward. Nothing. So he did the rational thing. He called his parents. He told them he believed he was near Lind, a tiny town south of Marshall. He could see lights in the distance. He asked them to come get him. His dad, Brian, got dressed and headed out the door, keeping Brandon on the phone. What followed was a 47-minute phone call that would become central to one of the most mysterious disappearances in America. Brandon said he'd walk toward the lights. Brian would drive from Marshall, heading toward Lind. They agreed to meet on the roadside, but they never saw each other. Brandon kept describing what he saw: gravel under his feet, a fence line, what he thought was a grain elevator. He even said he could hear running water. His dad drove up and down the road where Brandon claimed to be, flashing headlights, calling out, turning around. But there was nothing. No one. It was as if Brandon was walking through a different world entirely. And then, just before 1 a.m., the words that would echo forever. "Oh shit." The line went dead. Brian Swanson pulled over and stared at his phone. He waited, expecting the call to reconnect. Maybe Brandon had dropped the phone. Maybe the battery died. Maybe he just lost service for a second. But seconds turned into minutes, then an hour. He Redialed. Straight to voicemail. He and his wife drove up and down every gravel road between Marshall and Lind, headlights cutting through the darkness, calling Brandon's name out the windows. Nothing. No figure in the ditch. No movement in the cornfields. No flashlight. No shadow. No sound. It didn't make sense. He'd just been on the phone. Less than a minute before, Brandon had been walking, talking, explaining his surroundings. He didn't sound afraid, not until the very last word. And then he was gone. By morning, the fear turned to panic. They contacted local police. The response was polite but dismissive. He's an adult, the officer said. He has a right to disappear if he wants to. No immediate search. No missing person report. Only when his abandoned car was found later that day, miles away from where Brandon said he was, did law enforcement realize something was very wrong. He wasn't near Lind. He wasn't even close. He was 25 kilometers away in a completely different direction. Late the next morning, a deputy found Brandon's car. It wasn't anywhere near Lind. The Chevy Lumina was discovered just outside the tiny town of Taunton, northwest of Marshall, almost the complete opposite direction Brandon said he'd been walking toward. He hadn't been heading south. He had been deep in the countryside, 25 kilometers away from the area he described. There were no tire marks indicating sudden braking. No sign of an accident. The car had simply rolled gently off the road into a shallow ditch. It was upright. The engine was off. The keys were gone. The field around it was empty. There were no footprints. No signs of struggle. No cigarette butts. No dropped phone. Nothing to suggest where Brandon had gone or why. But the most unsettling detail came from his voice. He had described walking toward the lights of a city what he believed was Lind. He talked about following fences, crossing gravel, passing buildings, but he wasn't near Lind. And the lights he saw, they didn't exist. There were no visible city lights from the car's location. No water nearby. No structures that matched what he described. It was as if Brandon had been describing an entirely different landscape, one that didn't match reality, one that only he could see. When law enforcement realized Brandon had not just disappeared, but had been nowhere near where he said he was, the tone shifted. Search teams were called in. Volunteers, deputies, and canine units began canvassing the area around Taunton. It was standard farmland flat, open, with occasional trees and ditches. There were no cliffs, no dense forests. Nothing on paper that could swallow a person whole. The dogs picked up a trail from Brandon's car. They followed it for nearly 3 miles along the gravel roads and through fields. The trail went through grass, a ditch, and alongside a creek bed. And then it just stopped. No turn, no sign of a fall, no indication he'd turned back. Just nothing. The scent ended midfield, like a footprint that never landed. The searchers were baffled. They scoured the nearby Yellow Medicine River, fearing Brandon may have fallen in and drowned. They brought divers. They checked culverts and bridges. No body, no clothing. No signs of a slide or splash. The dogs showed no indication he had gone into the water at all. But they found something else, or rather, noticed something missing. There were no dropped items. No phone, no wallet, no shoes, not a single object left behind. Brandon had been on the phone only minutes before. That phone had stayed powered on for over 12 hours after the call dropped. But even with pings, towers, and tracking the device was never located. It was as if he'd walked out of the world. The last ping from Brandon's phone came from a cell tower near Minneota, a tiny town south of Taunton. The signal bounced off just once, and then nothing. Not a gradual fade, not a lost connection, just silence. Investigators attempted to triangulate the signal, but the terrain was flat, the towers few, the phone had been on, it had been searching for service, but somehow it never connected again. It was like the signal had gone underground or nowhere at all. The search expanded. Airplanes flew overhead, helicopters scanned the fields, heat sensors were deployed, hundreds of volunteers combed through miles of farmland, gravel roads, and fence lines. Horses were brought in for uneven terrain. Cadaver dogs sniffed through every wooded patch. But they were all chasing a ghost. What made the case different, what made it strange, was how ordered it was. There was no chaos, no violence, no evidence of someone running or fleeing or hiding. The car was parked. The trail was calm. The scent trail was clean, steady, until it wasn't. It was as if Brandon had walked into a wall of static, a place where no signal, cellular or human, could pass through. Some of the searchers, even seasoned ones, reported an unsettling atmosphere in certain areas. One volunteer described the fields as too quiet. Another refused to go back after his dog stopped and refused to move forward, whining into the empty wind. They never found Brandon. They never found his phone. They never found anything. At first, investigators clung to logic. Maybe Brandon had fallen into the river and drowned. Maybe he suffered a medical emergency. Maybe he wandered too far, collapsed from exhaustion, and was missed during the searches. Maybe, just maybe, he decided to disappear. But every explanation unraveled under scrutiny. The river theory? Divers scoured it for weeks. Sonar was used. Dogs sniffed along the banks. No trace, no drag marks, no torn fabric, no scent in the water. A medical emergency? He had no known conditions. He was alert during the call, walking steadily, describing landmarks. His voice never wavered, not until the final second. Voluntary disappearance? Brandon had no reason to run. He was close with his family. He had plans for the future. And if he had wanted to vanish, why call his parents in the middle of the night? Why stage a 47-minute call that ended with panic? And then there was the geography. He believed he was near Lind, but his car was found miles away, in the opposite direction. There was no sign he had ever been near Lind at all. So how could he have described it so clearly? The lights? The buildings? The water? What had he seen? And more importantly, where was he really walking that night? Some theorists pointed to the disorienting effects of the dark, to the sameness of rural roads. But others quietly, reluctantly began to ask a different question. What if Brandon wasn't lost in the dark? What if he had stepped into something that wasn't supposed to be there? The story of Brandon Swanson didn't end with the search. It only deepened, spreading through online forums, missing persons databases, and eventually into a strange category of disappearances known by one name: missing 411. It's not an official term. It comes from former police officer David Paulides, who compiled hundreds of missing persons cases across North America that share a chilling set of traits. No clear explanation. Sudden vanishings. Areas already searched. Bodies, when found, are often placed, not fallen. Electronics that go dark or malfunction. And most importantly, a sense of wrongness around the event. Brandon's case fit too well. He vanished mid-call. His phone stayed active for half a day. He described terrain that didn't exist. The scent trail ended in the middle of an open field. And perhaps most eerily, no one has ever found a single trace of him or his belongings. Many believe that Brandon, like others in these cases, entered somewhere else. Not a metaphor, not a breakdown, but a literal crossing into terrain that doesn't appear on maps. A fold in the land. A thin place. Some theorists call it the glitch. Others say it's just the wilderness, reclaiming the unlucky. But in southwestern Minnesota, there are no mountains, no caves, no fog, just endless sky, empty fields, and flat land. Which is exactly what makes Brandon's disappearance so disturbing. You can understand how someone might get lost in a forest. But how do you vanish into nothing? The volunteers who joined the search for Brandon were experienced. Many had worked missing persons cases before. They knew how to read terrain, how to follow scent trails, how to think like someone lost. But some of them didn't come back the same. One searcher, a local farmer who volunteered with his ATV, later told a reporter, "I don't like talking about that field, not because of what I saw, because of what I didn't." He described a sensation not being watched exactly, but being noticed. A subtle hum in the back of his neck. His GPS froze twice that day. His dog, normally calm, refused to step into one section of tall grass. Another volunteer said the silence was wrong. Not peaceful, not natural, just wrong. The wind didn't sound right out there, she said, and the birds were gone. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like disorientation without movement, like the world had shifted half a degree off balance, but only in that spot. Law enforcement never commented officially on these feelings, of course, but some deputies quietly requested to be reassigned after that weekend. And one cadaver dog handler told his team leader, "If he's out there, he's not where we're allowed to go." That phrase stuck. Not where we're allowed to go. No cliffs, no caves, no wilderness. Just Minnesota farmland and a missing boy who walked into it and was never seen again. For Brian and Annette Swanson, the silence after that call was unbearable. They replayed it over and over in their minds, not just the final moment, but everything leading up to it. His voice, his tone, the way he said, "I'm walking toward the lights." The quiet confidence, the casual rhythm, until it snapped. Annette later said, the way he said, "Oh shit," it wasn't scared like a scream. It was startled, like someone had just appeared in front of him. That moment haunted her. Not the fear, but the suddenness. They kept calling his phone for hours. Sometimes it rang, sometimes it didn't. They left voicemails. They begged, they cried, they asked him to pick up, but the phone never answered. It just stayed on, as if it were waiting for something too. 12 hours later, the battery died, and with it, the last thread of connection to their son. The worst part wasn't the uncertainty. It was the absence. Brandon had vanished, but nothing had replaced him. No remains, no items, no signal, not even false hope. Just a blank space in their lives where he used to be. Over time, they learned to stop expecting him to walk through the door. But they never stopped feeling like he was still out there, not in the way people say to comfort themselves, but something deeper, something primal. A quiet echo in the back of their minds, like his voice was still traveling, lost between cell towers and the sky. In the months that followed Brandon's disappearance, his parents refused to stay quiet. They met with lawmakers. They spoke to reporters. They asked hard questions. Why hadn't the police taken their son's call seriously? Why wasn't a search launched immediately? Why did they have to convince the system that something was wrong? Those questions led to action. In 2009, Minnesota passed Brandon's law, a bill requiring law enforcement to begin investigating as soon as an adult is reported missing under unusual or suspicious circumstances. The law also requires immediate entry into national databases, no matter the person's age. It was a victory, but a hollow one, because the law didn't bring Brandon back. It didn't explain what happened in that field. And it didn't answer the question that had begun to haunt not just his parents, but everyone who'd followed the case. How do you lose someone in a place so flat, so open, so ordinary, and never find a trace? Every year, they hold a candlelight vigil. Every year, new posters go up. And every year, another volunteer walks those roads, looks out across those fields, and wonders how the ground can hide a human being so completely. Brandon had changed more than policy. He had rewritten the rules of what it meant to disappear. Theories came quickly, and they were all so reasonable. Some said Brandon must have fallen into a hidden hole, a culvert, a shallow grave of water, but none existed along the path he walked. That entire area had been searched dozens of times, scanned with radar, scoured by dogs. There was no hole. Others insisted he must have died of exposure. Maybe he wandered too far and collapsed. But that land isn't mountainous or vast. It's open farmland. He couldn't have gone far. He couldn't have gone nowhere. The river? searched. The fields? Walked and rewalked. The scent trail? Gone mid-stride, like he vanished mid-step. People point to disorientation. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he thought the lights he saw were Lind, when in fact they were distant farms. But that doesn't explain how he described terrain that wasn't there, buildings, fences, running water. And what about the phone? Phones don't just vanish. They're built to be tracked, pinged, found. But Brandon stayed active for 12 hours and still managed to leave no digital trace beyond a single tower ping. You can't fall into a ditch and take your phone signal with you. You can't die from exposure and hide your belongings. Eventually, even the most rational minds hit a wall, and behind that wall is a void, a blank space in the map. A question no one has been able to answer since May 14, 2008. Where did Brandon Swanson go? There's a word some use for spots like this. Places where the world doesn't feel quite right. Where sound disappears. Where animals won't go. Where electronics fail. They call them thin places. Not supernatural. Not exactly. Just off. Places where the barrier between here and something else wears thin like cellophane pulled too tight. Western Minnesota doesn't have legends of monsters or ghosts. It's flat, agricultural, uneventful. But Brandon's disappearance turned one corner of it into a legend of its own. A place where a boy could walk under a clear sky, on an open road, while talking to his father and then not be anywhere anymore. Some believe he walked into a natural sink in space, a kind of invisible fold. Not death, not abduction, something else. He didn't die, he's just not here, one local said. Like he stepped behind the curtain of the world. It sounds absurd. Until you remember the facts. A phone that stayed powered but untraceable. A boy who described places that didn't exist. A trail that ended midfield. A final word, oh shit, followed by nothing. Some dismiss it as fantasy. Others think there are rules to this kind of disappearance, certain conditions that align just right, the right time, the right direction, the wrong step. And once you take that step, there's no coming back. Brandon Swanson's case isn't the first, and it's not the only one. In the years since his disappearance, researchers have drawn chilling parallels between his story and dozens of others, people vanishing in ordinary places, under extraordinary circumstances. Like Dior Kunz Jr., a 2-year-old who vanished from a family campsite in Idaho. He was there one moment, gone the next. No footprints, no sound, no body. Or Maura Murray, a college student who crashed her car on a snowy road in New Hampshire, stepped out and evaporated. No witnesses, no scent trail. Her phone went dark minutes later. The road was searched, the woods combed. Nothing. Or Dwight McCarter, a seasoned tracker in the Smoky Mountains, who said about another missing boy, I've never seen a case where there were no signs. He should have left something. That's the pattern. No signs. No struggle. No farewell. No conclusion. Just a person removed from space, as if edited out of reality. And there's always a moment, the last phone call, the last glimpse, the last word, where everything seems fine, right? Until it doesn't. Brandon's oh shit is burned into memory. Because it wasn't fear of the dark. It was fear of something he hadn't expected to be there. It's that moment, the one just before everything breaks, that binds these stories together. Different names, different places, but the same vanishing point, and the same silence that follows. Brandon's room is still there. His parents never turned it into an office, never cleared out the drawers. His shoes remain by the door. A shirt still hangs on the back of his chair. Not because they believe he's coming home tomorrow, but because they never knew how to say goodbye. Annette still keeps the same phone number. She still answers unknown calls. She still pauses before saying his name out loud, like she might break something if she speaks it too directly. There is no grave, no date to carve, only a law and a silence. Every year, the family holds a vigil. People light candles. Some leave notes. Some bring flowers. One year, a woman came who had never met Brandon. She didn't say anything. She just stood at the edge of the field where his scent had stopped and cried. Because there's something about the nothing that hurts the most. Not knowing is a wound that never scabs over. It reopens every morning. With every news story, every Facebook post about a missing person, every time the wind rushes through the cornfields in a way that makes you turn, just for a second, thinking, was that a voice? Annette once said in an interview, I don't think he's dead, but I don't think he's alive either. I think he's just not here. And I don't know what that means. No one does. But they're still listening. Sometimes people ask, what do you think happened to Brandon? The truth is, no one knows. Not his family, not the searchers, not the police, not the journalists who've covered his case for years. Everyone has a theory, and everyone admits it doesn't fit. Too clean, too quiet, too wrong. Maybe he slipped into the river and no one found him. Maybe he collapsed somewhere and the earth took him back. Maybe someone was waiting in the dark. Or maybe he's still walking, still moving toward lights that don't exist, still holding a phone that no longer connects, still trying to explain to someone on the other end of the line where he is, but the place doesn't exist on any map. There's a moment in every story like this where the facts stop and only the echo remains. Brandon's echo is made of 47 minutes of calm conversation, 1 word of fear, and 16 years of silence. Somewhere in the fields outside Taunton, Minnesota, the grass has grown back. The gravel road is the same. The wind still moves through the trees. But something changed that night, and nothing ever changed it back. And maybe that's the most terrifying possibility of all. That Brandon didn't disappear. That he's still there, just on the wrong side of the line. Some disappearances end in grief, some in discovery, some in justice. But Brandon Swanson's story ends in a ringing phone, a voice cut short, and a field that gave nothing back. It's not the most dramatic case. There was no crash, no blood, no violence, no ransom note. Just a boy trying to get home, talking to his father, step by step, until something stepped in between them. And if you think that's easier, think again. Because mystery isn't made of shadows and monsters. It's made of silence. And silence is louder than anything when it stretches for 16 years. No matter how many theories we spin, how many maps we draw, how many satellites sweep the skies, we are still asking the same question his parents asked that night. Brandon, where are you? Maybe that question still echoes, bouncing between towers, across cornfields, through the night. Maybe you hear it faintly. When the wind dies down and your signal drops, maybe we're all just walking toward lights that aren't really there. And maybe, just maybe, someone is still trying to answer